All right, welcome to this week's podcast. This week I'm excited to have Chris Swaim with Swaim Appraisals with us today. But before we get into our discussion, over the last few years, we've averaged over 14,000 real estate transactions in central Iowa. And just kind of a rough estimate, well over 90% of those real estate transactions are financed, and most financed real estate transactions require an appraisal. And so today we're going to be talking about Chris Swaim and his career and what he does for a living, and also kind of do a little bit of a deep dive in appraisals and what they do and why they exist. So without further ado, Chris, welcome to this week's podcast.
Thanks, Jason.
Awesome.
Glad to be here.
All right, to start out with, we like to kind of start out with some personal information. So how long you've been living in Des Moines for? What high school did you go to?
Sure.
Family, things like
Okay.
that.
I've been in Des Moines pretty much my whole life. Moved here when I was 2.
Oh, wow.
So lived on the south side for 20 years and went to Des Moines Christian and then to Dowling and then to Iowa State. So I've pretty much been in Iowa my whole life. I've got been married for 22 years.
That's great.
Have 3 kids. Sophomore at Iowa State, junior at Des Moines Christian, and a 7th grader at Waukee. I've been appraising for over 25 years, just over 25 years. Actually, even before then, so it's a family business. My dad started the company back in the 1970s, and I started working for him when I was even in high school, just taking pictures, getting film developed before we had internet.
Oh, wow.
Which will date me.
Yeah.
But we had to take actual pictures and get the film developed and staple pictures onto paper reports and hand deliver actual appraisal reports to lenders and drive all over. So there was a lot of work for a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
To go deliver appraisals and all that type of stuff. So I fell in love with the business, when I was 16 years old, really.
Yeah.
So
man, oh man. So when you went to Iowa State, what did you study at Iowa State?
I was a marketing major.
Okay.
Really already knew what I wanted to do, but it was kind of like my dad said, you should still go to school just to make sure, and just have something to fall back on or whatever. And so it was kind of like just an arbitrary choice to I'll go to Iowa State, I'll study marketing, but I knew what I wanted to do. I was getting into real estate.
That's unbelievable. So so describe a little bit more about your family business. Who works there? Yeah.
So like I said, my dad started it in the 70s. My mom came on as an appraiser somewhere in probably the early 80s.
Okay.
And so they were a husband and wife team for a number of years. And then I have 2 brothers, an older brother named Mike, who's 2 years older than me, and then a younger brother, Dan, who's about 4 years younger.
Okay.
And all of us just kind of got into appraising right out of college.
Yeah.
And my mom retired probably about 2.5 years ago, and my dad retired here just last year.
Yeah.
So it's just myself and my 2 brothers now.
Yeah.
Doing the business.
No, that's great.
So
yeah. So in regards to like as a team volume or as a company volume, how many? So I led with about 14,000 transactions. How many appraisals do you guys typically do?
I've never really looked at the numbers
for sure.
But I estimate that I probably do somewhere around 400 to 450 myself a year. So if there's now 3 of us, somewhere around 1,200 appraisals.
Yeah.
A year.
That's really it's very busy.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
I know, absolutely. And this is a busy time right now.
Oh, yeah.
With interest rates, it's crazy right now. Lenders are already, I'm hearing from different loan originators, like we are swamped, and we get that about a week or 2 later.
Yeah.
So we know it's already starting to come, and the interest rates are about historic lows right now.
Well, it's crazy. I got a phone call from today. Now, my client is A+, owned a house for 40 plus years and tremendous debt to income ratio, but he got quoted today for a 30-year mortgage at I think he said 2 7/8, which that would be the lowest I've ever seen personally on a 30-year mortgage. So it's crazy.
And I heard 2.5 for a 15-year.
Yeah.
And then we've got some rental properties, and we're refinancing a couple. We're getting 3.5 on an investment property.
No way.
Yeah.
That's the lowest. That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, it's a great time. It's a great time to buy. And the thing about the Des Moines market is, if the entire nation was like the Des Moines market, we would have higher interest rates.
Oh, yeah.
But thankfully, there is open markets, and the way that interest rates work, that we can benefit, with low interest rates, which is great. So
Des Moines has been a pretty insulated city, from the high swings. We saw some stagnant values for a while, but we've never seen the huge drops that that the coasts have seen, and even
Yeah.
some large cities in the Midwest have seen.
Yeah.
Des Moines is a great place to invest in real estate for sure.
I had a client a couple years ago. They bought a house in San Francisco, and over 3 years they literally did nothing to it, but it appreciated by over $200,000. It was
Wow.
I think what they told me was they bought it for like $310,000. It was 1,000 square foot with one stall attached garage, like 310, and then 2 to 3 years later they sold it for 550.
Wow.
So yeah, you don't see that in Des Moines.
No.
So what was really cool about them is that he had got a really good job offer in Des Moines, and so they chose to move to Des Moines, and they bought a house with the proceeds that was, I think, quadruple the size.
Yeah, I was
when
gonna
you
say,
add in the basement.
they were probably amazed at what
and
they
they
could
bought
get.
with cash, which was
Yeah.
incredible, which is cool. I mean, that's why Des Moines is consistently, listed as one of the best places
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
raise a family and work-life balance. So.
Yeah.
So let's kind of let's do a little bit of a deep dive on appraisals.
Sure.
So, why is it an appraisal industry, so to speak?
Yeah, like the need for it. So people have to realize that our client is the bank or the lending institution, and so we become the eyes and ears for the lender.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are assuming this risk, and they need to leverage that risk. And so we become the person who says, here's what it looks like, here's what the market is showing, here's what we believe the value is, because they're the ones who are going to assume the risk.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of the appraisal is to have an unbiased opinion of value based upon some predetermined facts or just parameters that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
So that every appraiser is kind of looking at houses in the same way.
Yeah.
And so, it's important for lenders to make sure that they're not loaning on a house that's not worth what someone's willing to pay for. It's also important for the homeowner or the home buyer to not overpay for a property.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you've seen this before as a realtor, is some people can fall in love with the house and not make the best decision because maybe they've been looking for a long time, and all of a sudden the perfect house comes up that meets their needs, but it's overpriced.
Yeah.
And they just fall in love with it. We need to make sure that they're not making a bad decision. Really need to make sure the lender is not making a bad decision, because that's who, as an appraiser, that's who we're supposed to be trying to protect, is the lender's investment. So we're kind of their eyes and ears.
Absolutely. And it's like, when you break it down, it just makes perfect sense. Because when I educate buyers on this, it's like you're going to a bank and asking someone to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so this is kind of an additional step for them to make sure they're making the bank is lending on the right property.
Yeah.
And so my understanding is, and I'm not an appraiser, and I don't claim to be, an appraiser is kind of looking at the value, and then some loans, they look at the condition. Is that correct? So yeah, can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, well, condition certainly contributes to value.
Yes.
So I've sometimes described the appraiser as kind of the referee in a situation where, like so to speak, a basketball game.
That's right.
There are some times when you love to be a game is great when the referee isn't known.
Yeah.
You don't know the referee's name. There's no big crazy calls. Game goes on. Two teams play. Everything goes about. And there's a winner and a loser.
Yeah.
Well, there's two winners in the real estate side.
Yeah.
But in a game, there's a winner and loser, and everyone moves on.
Yeah.
There are times when we have to make a difficult call.
Yeah.
As an appraiser, and
That's
say, hey, blow the whistle. This doesn't look right.
Yeah.
And so that does happen every once in a while. But that's the whole purpose. That's why there's a referee. That's why there's an appraiser.
Yeah.
So I think I went off on a tangent on your question, though.
No, it's good. So regards are there different parameters on an FHA loan or a conventional loan, or is it pretty much the same?
As far as determining value, it's all the same, whether it's FHA, VA, or conventional loan, or cash purchase if we do an appraisal for that.
Yeah.
We're still trying to determine what the market value is, and I look at comps. I do everything the same way.
Yeah.
With an FHA or a VA, there's a few certain things that we have to look at that we would make requirements have to be done.
Yeah.
That would deal with safety and security of the home. For example, peeling paint. Any house built prior to 1978, there was the potential of having lead-based paint.
Yeah.
So if your house was built prior to 1978 and you've got peeling paint, it doesn't matter if the house was painted 6 months ago.
Yeah.
If there's peeling paint, that's going to have to be scraped and painted,
Yeah.
spot painted in those areas. That's pretty much the biggest thing that we see with FHA and VA requirements is peeling paint. There's other things, but such as anything that might be considered a safety issue.
Yeah.
Stairs where you have this open drop and they don't have a handrail. It used to be we had to put a handrail on anything that was more than 3 steps. They took that out.
Sure.
Because you don't necessarily have to have that. But if there's a drop off and you imagine a 3-year-old walking down the stairs and they stumble and they fall over to the side. So some of the things like that where we would determine as a safety issue.
Got it.
Electrical issues can be safety issues for sure.
Absolutely.
Also looking at a roof, making sure that the roof has at least 3 years of remaining life.
Yep.
And then things like structural and things like that. So FHA, VA, you may run into some things if you're a seller where the appraiser may come back and say, hey, this needs to be done prior to closing. Mm-hmm. And then it's on you, the seller, to get that done. Or you can negotiate it with the buyer and kind of figure out what's the best way to remedy this.
Absolutely. And I think the referee is a good analogy because who gives you the guidelines? Like, where do the guidelines come from, I guess, when you talk about standard practice?
Well, so we operate under the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Big word, just USPAP. And that kind of just our guidelines for how we arrive at value, how we look at properties, all that type of stuff. And like I said, FHA, VA, a little bit more strict than a conventional.
Yeah.
If I see something in a conventional appraisal that might be a safety issue or peeling paint, for example, I will still state that I've seen it, but I will say, but I'm considering this in my overall condition of the property. I'm not making it a requirement. So making sure that you disclose and so that everybody's aware. And then sometimes an underwriter or a lender's underwriter might come into play and say, hey, we want this to be taken care of, even though it's a conventional loan. So that can happen too.
Absolutely.
So you're not always, even on a conventional sale, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have a work requirement come about because an underwriter may not like what they see on an appraisal. We have to disclose what we see.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that the referee is a really good analogy because what you're talking about, it's like you are kind of going by the guidelines and you got to call it out.
Yeah.
As an appraiser, you got to call it out when you see it, and then you put it in the bank's court, and then the bank, their underwriter decides what they want done, type of thing. And I've had that experience before where someone does a conventional loan where the underwriter still wants to have it. And I think buyers need to understand, and so do sellers, is that the offer. The way that I fashion offers, a lot of realtors do, it's subject to financing, which ultimately is also subject to the appraisal. And so it's ultimately that's the process. And even though it may not be a requirement on your end, you still need to notate it like a referee. You got to call it as you see it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of keeps kind of the free market the way it is because it lets the buyer to know, what's going on. That's why it's important as a buyer. You're supposed to have, I think it's a few days prior to closing, you're supposed to be able to get the appraisal to review it. So it's important to actually read through the appraisal. You get to gain a lot of insight on the neighborhood as well, but it's important to look at the condition component. Even if you had a home inspection, it's good to do a quick look
for
at
sure
that too. So
in fact, in every appraisal, we put a comment in that buyers are strongly recommended to have a home inspection done on any purchase. Because as an appraiser, and maybe we'll get into this later, I don't know, but we're not home inspectors. We're not experts in, like, I'm not an expert in electrical issues, but I can spot something that looks a little fishy. And so it's vitally important for a buyer, even in some cases, a new home, to have a home inspect, pay that $300, $350, whatever it might be, just for that peace of mind. And it allows, you as the buyer to come back, within 10 days of your acceptance of the offer, to say, hey, we'd like this and this and this done, and then you have that's some negotiating power there too, still at the early stages.
It's eyes wide open is really important, you kind of touched on this, but especially working with VA buyers, and I don't know if it's the VA paperwork, but they make the appraisal sound like it's an inspection. And that's the most common loan where a buyer thinks that the appraisal is the inspection, at least in my experience. So it might be just a verbiage, but so what's the difference between appraisal and an inspection?
So what we're looking at is we're getting an overall picture of the house itself and what the market value is based upon, comparable properties. Certainly we are trying to keep an eye out for things that look like they might be deferred maintenance issues that might need to be fixed and repaired. But like I said, we would factor that into maybe our condition of the house. You can buy a foreclosure for $50,000 less than what it might be worth if you had some repairs done to it. And so that value determines, is set by the work that needs to be done in a lot of cases. So VA, VA is a little bit different than FHA. FHA has some set guidelines for us to follow. VA a lot of times simply tells us, hey, you make the decision. You choose what you feel is best to determine the safety and soundness of the home. I've had times when I've reached out to the VA on a question like, for example, electrical issue. I'm like, hey, it looks a little fishy. I would like to call for an electrician to come out and inspect the home. The VA says, no, we don't want you to call for an expert to come out and look at it. We just want you to decide either A, it doesn't need to be done, or it needs to be repaired.
Got it.
Which is interesting. I'd rather be able to say, hey, I'd like to put this in the hands of a professional roofer to come out and take a look at the roof. Does it have enough remaining life?
Yeah.
So VA kind of just puts the ball in the appraiser's court, which in some ways, can get a little sticky. You want to make sure that you're making a good decision for the lender and for the VA. Now that's your second client now all of a sudden.
Yeah.
VA appraisals can be a little bit stricter. The other thing to consider too is every appraiser is different.
Yeah.
You could have two different VA appraisers do the same inspection on a house and come up with 5 or 6 requirements, and the other one have nothing.
Yep.
And so that's something that you just have to be prepared as a seller that there may be some things that come up. And things to look for would just be things that you would see as a safety issue or something that affects the soundness or the security of the home.
Yep.
Rotten windowsills can affect the security of the home just in that can become more and more damaging and mess up the siding and get internal and get mold inside your drywall, all that type of stuff. That would be like a security of the home type issue.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, and you brought up some good points. Overall, it's like you are hired on behalf of the bank to do the appraisal. And then in a home inspection, the home inspector is like getting paid by the buyer. So it's like there's a little bit of a difference there. Yeah.
Yeah, common misconception a lot of borrowers or buyers think is that I'm representing them.
Yeah.
They're not my client.
Yep.
And I've had that conversation many times where they say, well, when am we get a copy of this appraisal, right? And I will say, well, my client is X bank.
Yeah.
I report to them. I'm sure they'll give you a copy of the report if you're the borrower.
Yep.
But as a seller, you have no access to the appraisal. I can only divulge my results directly to my client and nobody else.
Yep.
So even as the borrower in a transaction, your name's on the appraisal as borrower, but it's the client who I can divulge the information to.
Yep.
So, it's a common misconception that people think they have the right to it.
Yep.
Not from me.
Yep.
From their
You give it to the
bank.
bank, and then the bank will send it over. So if someone were wanting to get their appraisal license, what is the updated requirement? Or roughly,
It's been 25 years.
Yeah.
So it's changed. And I honestly have not looked up what all is necessary.
Yeah.
It's been so long. Sure. So, but no, honestly, I don't know the answer to that, Jason. I didn't prepare for that.
No.
I know that it's a difficult industry to get into because you have to work under somebody for a certain number of hours, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is a lot of appraisal companies are small family businesses, husband and wife, 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
They bring on somebody. They're adding 25% of their company.
Yeah.
By just hiring one other appraiser.
Yeah.
And then the risk for them is once they get their hours in,
Yeah.
they'll go off on their own and they'll set up their own clients and they become a competitor.
Yeah.
So it's a hard business to get into.
Yeah.
And that's why you see a lot of them. There's multiple where they're family businesses.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what I luckily fell into.
Yeah, because that's one key distinction. Maybe the specifics we won't get into. Maybe we'll put a disclaimer right at this time. But it's more of an apprenticeship component. A little bit more of that compared to real estate. You just have to pass your exam, or you got to take a class to pass. So within a couple months, you could be selling properties. But appraisal is not that way, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It requires you have to have a lot of experience for a lender to put their trust in you to. For you to tell them that this house is worth $1 million, and they're going to loan on $1 million, home, you need to have some experience behind you. Yeah. And so even once you put in those hours, you still have to have somebody, sign on behalf of your appraisal, where there's 2 different signatures. There's the appraiser, and then there's a supervisory appraiser. Yeah. So, it's a long process, but man, if you can get into the business, it's worth it. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be very interesting, but I think just breaking in would be a challenge, because I understand with me, I have a couple employees, so it's hard to kind of, as a family business, try to figure out the right way of growing a business. just even making sure you have enough income,
Sure.
type of thing.
Absolutely.
So that in of itself is challenging. Then down the road, there's that cognizant, or you're cognizant of that with that. So one thing I've heard over the years is a pre-listing appraisal. Do you do some of those? What are some pros? Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll get hired by realtors who we'll have some realtors who just do it on a regular basis. They say, hey, I'd like you to do a pre-appraisal. And for them, the benefit is you have obviously an unbiased opinion of the value. They also can use that appraisal as a marketing tool. They'll set that appraisal out on the kitchen table and say, hey, we've had the property inspected by a home inspector. We've had the property appraised by an appraiser. Here's where we're asking. Now that works if the appraisal comes in at where they want to list it at.
For sure.
If it comes in, the appraisal is lower and they want to list it higher, they, it's their prerogative. Just put that appraisal and tuck it away. That's just between me and them. But it serves as a good marketing tool.
Sure.
Other people will have us do a pre-listing appraisal on a really unique or difficult property. We'll have realtors call us and say, hey, I don't know where to list this thing. I need some help. And sometimes it's not that realtors don't know what they're doing. It's just, it's nice to get a second opinion. And so we put our heads together and I give, we give our opinion, and we got it. We also look at all of our pre-listing appraisals the same way we would do for a mortgage lender. We're making sure that we're abiding by the same USPAP criteria so that they won't be shocked when, let's say, we appraise a house for $250,000, they put it on the market, they sell for $250,000, and then some other appraiser comes in and appraises it for $175,000.
Sure.
We want to make sure that we're doing it the same way we would do anything else.
So you have really good insight on this because you've been in the industry for 25 years. What are your thoughts about where do you think the industry will be in 20 years? Like if your son joins, do you have any spidey sense or how has it changed? I guess
it's changed a ton in just, I suppose, the speed. When I first got into this, you took actual pictures and had to get film developed and hard copy appraisals and deliver them to people and all that type of stuff. You didn't have the internet. You had the MLS consisted of a book that would come out like every quarter, and you'd get this giant book of all these pictures of houses, and that was your data. So obviously a lot has changed with the internet. But boy, 20 years from now, it's we've heard for years that the appraisal industry could go away just because of automated appraisals. And that was especially a risk, or at least a looming thought maybe 10 years ago or so. When the market hit, in 2007, 2008, 2009, when things kind of went south a lot of ways, I think the industry realized the importance of having appraisals. That these automated valuations, may work in some areas, but boy, every house is different, and every market is unique, and every neighborhood is different. And so, I think the need for appraisals has become much, much greater over the last 10 years or so as the market kind of fluctuates up and down. Where market even fluctuates from year to year.
It does.
It's interesting. From what I've experienced over the last several years, the best time to be a seller is right now. Late winter, early spring, February, March, April, May. That seems to be the time when there's a shortage of listings. And people are ready to buy. And values are at their peak. That's when you get almost your top dollar for the year, so to speak. And then come August, September, right around state fair time, that seems like things just, they don't go down, but they just stagnate. And there's more properties on the market than what's been selling, and the houses sit on the market longer. Catch-22 of that is it's a great time to sell at this time, but is there a house out there for you to buy? And so it's really hard for buyers and sellers to figure that out. When's the best time? Do you want to make the most money on your sale and then have to settle for what's out there? Or do you wait and it's tough.
It's really challenging during this time of year. And one thing I just talk to my sellers, about this is that, you might get top dollar, but you're going to sell high, but you're also going to buy high. And I think the good thing is about home ownership, a lot of people, unless you're like a flipper, but most of these people are buying a house for like livelihood components and just want to make a sound decision compared with what the market has to offer. And one thing we do talk about at times is with some sellers is doing a subject to seller finding a home of choice to kind of
Mm-hmm.
protect them. But yeah, it's an exciting time of year right now, and
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's a wild ride. And I like sports analogies as well, but it's just kind of like you know, as a real estate agent, you make a plan, and then you can call it a play. You run the play, and then when it works out, it's a beautiful thing, you know. So consistently it has, but
Yeah.
you just kind of the biggest thing is being wise as a seller, just knowing the next step. It could sell
For sure.
And what are you going to do next, and what's the plan, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And one thing that, you know, sellers should be aware of too is during this time, this seems to be the time, from my experience, where we have the most trouble, or where we see the most low appraisals. Now, low appraisal, we don't see a ton of them where I'm coming in low on a sale.
Yeah.
But it does happen.
Yeah.
And this is the time when it happens the most. And the reason is because you have a shortage of listings out there. House may go on the market, and you have, you know, 3 different people offering on the house. They offer full price or over full price. And all of a sudden, we're trying to find comps. So when we look for comparable properties, we're going back 12 months.
Yeah.
So if we find a comp that sold 6 months ago,
Yeah.
you know, 6 months ago was September when the market started to become stagnant,
Yeah.
you know, or 3 months ago when it was December and Christmas time or whatever. And so it's hard sometimes to find. We're looking at historical data to determine present value.
Yeah.
And so if the value all of a sudden is starting to go up because of supply and demand, and we're looking back at these properties, sometimes it's hard to justify that value. And so sellers need to be aware. You may fall in love with this house and you're competing with somebody else to buy it, and you're willing to pay over list price or whatever. But you should make sure and have and ask your realtor, hey, help me. Are we overpaying for this? Because I don't want all of a sudden win the bid. And then the appraisal comes in low, and we can't afford to bring the extra money to the table, and they go to the other offerer. You know. So this is the time when we see mostly the lower values coming in.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's a new season right now, and consistently homes have been appreciating. So it's a new season, and you're right, precisely. It's just like you have to justify from past sales. When it's a new season, it's an appreciating market. If there's not enough comparable properties, it's not going to appraise.
Right.
And I think that is something that it is important that our market understands. And the reason why is the data's got to support the sales price.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, on a little fun note, who do you have winning the men's NCAA tournament this year?
Honestly,
I will give you. You can just throw someone out there, and if you're right, my company will send you a gift card. Yeah.
Wow. You know, I haven't even looked at obviously the brackets haven't come out. I haven't thought, we do a big bracket thing with our family and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm an Iowa State fan.
Yeah.
Sad to
So
say.
I'm a huge fan too.
The Big Ten is really good this year.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised to see a Big Ten team win, because I feel like the ACC is a little
They're
top
down.
heavy. Carolina's obviously down. Duke, you just never know. You can never trust Krzyzewski in March. So sometimes they're really good.
crazy.
Sometimes they lose to Hofstra or whatever.
Yep.
So I'll say this. I'll go with Tom Izzo. The guy knows what he's doing, and he knows how to win in March. And it feels like he's got them playing pretty well right now. So I've only watched them play once. They played Iowa.
I think the less you know going into
Yeah,
the
right.
tournament, the better you do in
Probably
the bracket
true.
challenge. But no, it seems like Izzo. Yeah, I mean he really does. And I don't know if they had injuries earlier this year. I don't know, but. No, it sounds good.
We'll
so,
see.
if you're right, we'll send you a little Jethro's gift card.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So,